many Muslims, they'll tell you that Jesus was a Muslim. They'll tell you that, and they'll also explain to you what the meaning of Jesus being a Muslim is, because just linguistically, Muslim means someone who's a servant to the will of God, and then they point to, for example, John chapter 6 verse 38, where Jesus says, "I have not come down to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me." That's what Jesus says in John chapter 6 verse 38. So Muslims will say, you see, Jesus, he was doing the will of God. He's a Muslim. He was doing the will of the Father, right? But, I mean, it's just so dishonest that they don't even look at the verse that comes after verse 38. Because Jesus, he explains in verse 39 what the will of the Father is. What is the will of the Father? The will of the Father is that anyone who believes that Jesus Christ is the Son, that you believe in the one whom the Father sent, that is the Son, Jesus Christ. If you believe that, then if you believe that, which is the Father's will, if you believe that, then you have salvation, and I, Jesus Christ, will resurrect you on the day of judgment. So Jesus himself explains what the will of the Father, which he does, is. He explains what the will of the Father is that Jesus is doing. What is the will of the Father? The will of the Father is that you should believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, because it says that you should believe the Son whom the Father had sent. So Jesus is saying, the will of the Father is that you believe in me as the Son of God, and if you believe in that, I'll resurrect you on the day of judgment. Now that's, oh my God, that's so much against what Muslims they represent. Because the will of the Father that Jesus is doing, that's in total contradiction to what Muslims believe. Because what Jesus is saying is, the will of the Father is that you should believe in me as the Son of God, and if you believe I'm the Son of God, I'll resurrect you on the day of judgment. Wow. So what is Jesus saying here? You should believe in him as the Son of God, because that's the will of the Father, that you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and Jesus will resurrect you on the day of judgment. So Muslims, they don't believe in the will of, they don't believe that they don't believe in the will of the Father. They disbelieve in that. Because Jesus explains what the will of the Father is. The will of the Father is that you believe that Jesus is the Son, and Jesus will resurrect you physically on the day of judgment. So Muslims, they disbelieve in the will of the Father, although they use these verses out of context to say, you see, Jesus was doing the will of God. So he's a Muslim. Well, Jesus is doing the will of God, which is that you believe that Jesus is the Son, and that Jesus will resurrect you on the day of judgment. And you disbelieve in the will of the Father. You disbelieve in what the will of the Father is. Because Muslims, they don't believe Jesus is the Son of God, and they don't believe that Jesus is God, because Jesus says he will resurrect you on the day of judgment, a thing only God does. So Jesus doing the will of God doesn't make him a Muslim. It actually makes him God and equal to the Father, right? So this completely destroys everything that Muslims stand for. So Jesus doing the will of the Father, doing the will of God, that is something that Muslims dislike, that it's something that they disbelieve in, and it annihilates everything they stand for. So Muslims, they should not celebrate Jesus doing the will of the Father, because the will of the Father is that you believe that Jesus is the Son, and Jesus will resurrect you on the day of judgment. And Muslims, they don't believe in the will of the Father, because Jesus explains what it is. Right? So next time, don't use this verse. Right? Because if you read it in context, it destroys everything you stand for, and you disbelieve in the will of the Father. And it's not good for you that Jesus is doing the will of the Father. And it definitely doesn't make him Muslim, because he claims to be the Son of God, and he claims that he'll resurrect the believers on the day of judgment. It destroys you, man.